I recently found out my husband, Wilson, has been secretly sending money to his family even when we are struggling to pay bills. I truly believed, that we were a team, managing this impossible financial tightrope walk together. My name is Mary, 34, and a former human resource manager who put my career on hold to manage our home and raise our children. I'm the one who handles the budget, who stretches every dollar until it screams, and who lies awake at night counting the debt. My greatest fear has always been losing control, and finding this deceit was like watching the one solid pillar of my life crumble into dust. The trust I built with Wilson over 15 years, the foundation of our entire life, was secretly eroded by him, transaction by covert transaction. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. We've had months where the anxiety of survival clung to us like a damp, cold sheet, the rent payment looming, the sheer panic over the twins' private school tuition, the relentless calculations just to afford groceries for the week. The tightness wasn't just budgetary, it was physical. It felt like a knot permanently lodged in my chest, a low, persistent thrum of stress that never quieted. I was living under the heavy weight of an impending financial crisis, and he was supposed to be my anchor, my partner in the fight. We had agreed explicitly 2 years ago, when Wilson's tech startup took a hit and his salary froze, that every single available dollar, down to the last 50 cents, had to go toward paying down the high-interest credit card debt and creating a buffer for emergencies. He promised me. He swore he was on board, that he understood the precariousness of our situation. We made painful choices together. We sold my vintage Roadster. We cut out the weekly gate night dinners, replacing them with cheap takeout and strained silence. I even started designing cheap graphics online just to bring in an extra $300 a month. All these sacrifices, all this fear, I endured believing we were doing it together. I just couldn't fathom the depth of the betrayal. That shared burden was the only thing that made the struggle bearable. Now that memory is poisoned. Every cold dinner, every skipped dental appointment for myself, every tired, frustrated conversation about money feels like a cruel, elaborate joke he played only on me. The betrayal wasn't merely a lie. It was an act of profound emotional cruelty. He witnessed my stress, the dark circles under my eyes from sleepless nights spent poring over bank statements, and he not only failed to ease it, he actively contributed to it. When I questioned him about the missing funds, the little anomalies that always threw my budget off, he had a ready supply of plausible excuses. "Unexpected repairs, Mary," he'd say. "You know how things just pop up." And I swallowed it, because to question him further felt like questioning the very fabric of our marriage. I hated the feeling of being the nagging wife. So I chose silence and more work, trying desperately to make up for the phantom debt he was secretly creating. The shame and the confusion of not being able to manage our money when I was trying so hard was actually a smokescreen he had deliberately created to hide his secret life. My growing doubt was a sign of his deep dishonesty. The earliest flicker of suspicion wasn't a sudden discovery, but a slow, chilling accretion of small anomalies. There was always a gap, a certain amount that vanished between his paycheck hitting the account and the scheduled bill payments. I'd pore over the online ledger, squinting at the numbers, checking my math thrice. It was never a huge sum, maybe $500 here, $700 there, but in our fragile economy, $500 was a utility bill, a week's worth of gas, or a buffer against an overdraft fee. Whenever I brought it up, Wilson would perform the same practiced, soothing gesture, rubbing my back, assuring me it was just an error in my tracking. "Unexpected expenses, Mary," he'd sigh, sounding weary, not deceptive. The furnace repair needed a different part. I had to cover the company dinner for the new client. You know how it is. I believed him. I hated questioning him, hated sounding like the nagging wife. So I swallowed the doubt and tried to make up the deficit elsewhere, never realizing I was compensating for his lie. The doubt, however, had taken root, coiling like a serpent around my calm. It wasn't just the money. It was the subtle shift in his demeanor when the topic came up. A fleeting defensiveness in his eyes, a quickness to change the subject, a sudden need to check his phone when I was near his work bag. I started rationalizing it away. He was under stress at work. He was embarrassed about our finances. He was just tired. But the rationalizations were brittle. The financial stress we were under was profound, and a partnership built on transparency was the only thing keeping us afloat. The thought that he might be lying about something so fundamental, so critical to our children's security, was a terror too great to face directly. I was terrified that if I pulled the thread, the entire tapestry of our marriage would unravel, leaving me exposed and alone in the cold. A true unraveling began with a mundane thing, a pizza box. We were having a rare, cheap Friday night in, and Wilson was taking the trash out. He had crumpled up a delivery receipt he'd left on the counter. Out of habit, and perhaps a growing cold compulsion, I smoothed it out. It was a receipt for a high-end sushi place, a place we hadn't afforded in a year, and the total was over $200. It was dated from last Tuesday, a night he claimed he was working late in the office, eating a dry sandwich at his desk. My stomach dropped, but the name on the receipt wasn't ours. It was a restaurant near his sister Kristen's apartment complex in downtown Boston. That was the pivotal moment. The moment curiosity curdled into icy, absolute certainty. The money wasn't just missing, it was being spent. And not on us. The feeling was not sadness yet. It was a pure, white-hot, furious tension demanding release. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I sat in the darkness, the sushi receipt clutched in my hand, my mind racing. I was faced with a horrifying moral decision. Invade his privacy or live with the gnawing, soul-destroying uncertainty. Wilson had always been meticulous about keeping his financial apps private, using a fingerprint ID on his work phone. It felt wrong, a violation of the trust he'd already shattered. Yet, I knew that if I asked him about the sushi receipt, he would invent a plausible lie, a client dinner, a forgotten birthday. I needed the truth, unvarnished and irrefutable, to protect myself and my children from the collapse that was surely coming. I crept out of bed at 3 a.m. He was sleeping heavily, worn out from his fictional late nights, with a pounding heart and hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. I held his thumb down on the scanner. It unlocked instantly. The soft glow of his banking app illuminated the bedroom ceiling, and for a terrifying second, I almost closed it. But the need for truth was stronger than the shame of the action. I navigated to the transaction history. I wasn't looking for sushi. I was looking for the recurring drain. I scrolled back, month after month, and there they were. Not one unexpected expense, but a steady, almost rhythmic pattern of large electronic transfers, marked discreetly as W-Data's payment. The amounts weren't round numbers. They were specific, indicating a fixed obligation. $850, $850, $850, every single month on the 3rd. The recipient name was listed simply as K. Davis, Kristen, my sister-in-law. It wasn't a one-time emergency. It was a sustained, calculated allocation of our family's funds, diverted to his sister's care, 700 words shy of our house payment, but enough to fully cover Kristen's rent. The betrayal was complete. My hands went numb, and the phone slipped onto the carpet, the screen going dark, plunging me back into the cold, tense silence. I didn't wake him. I didn't scream or cry or throw things. The emotion that hit me was far colder and more devastating than rage. It was the clarity of utter emptiness. I realized that for 2 years I had been married to a ghost, a financial actor playing the role of a devoted husband while orchestrating a separate life. The worst part wasn't the money, not the thousands of dollars we could have used to erase the lingering threat of debt. It was the lies. Every time I stressed, he watched me. Every time I told him I was cutting corners again, he nodded sympathetically. He actively participated in my stress while secretly funding his sister's comfort. I went into the spare room, curled up on the chaise lounge, and waited for the dawn. I had to compose myself, to formulate a strategy. The truth was a weapon now, and I had to wield it with the precision of a surgeon, not the hysteria of a wounded wife. Wilson came padding into the spare room just as the weak, gray morning light began to filter through the blinds. He looked rumpled, confused, and instantly apprehensive. "Mary, what are you doing in here? Are you okay?" His voice was laced with an unearned, casual concern that made my stomach churn. I didn't look up immediately. I just gently slid his work phone across the floor toward his feet. Letting it come to rest near his slippers, I took a deep, steadying breath. "Look at your banking app, Wilson. Go to the transaction history. I need you to look at the transfers to Kay Davis for the last 24 months. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with dread. He didn't ask how I knew. He didn't ask what transfers. He simply froze, his face draining of all color as he understood that the secret, which he had guarded with such meticulous deceit, was finally exposed. He sank onto the floor, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of frantic panic. He started with denial, a clumsy, pitiful attempt to claim it was an old account, a mistake. But I was relentless. $850, Wilson. The third of every month. That's Kristen's exact rent, isn't it? When she lost her job last year. And the $1,200 transfer in January, that was for our twins' tuition, but you said we didn't have enough, and we had to take out a loan. Where did the money go, Wilson?" He finally cracked. His eyes pleaded for understanding, but all I felt was cold, hard fury. "They depend on me, Mary. You don't understand the pressure. My mother is frail, and Kristen has 3 kids. I can't just abandon them. I'm the only one who can help them keep their apartment, keep them afloat." He tried to reach for my hand, but I recoiled as if he were poisonous, the scent of his deception overwhelming me. Defense was a desperate torrent of justifications, painting himself as the selfless, burdened eldest son. He explained that his mother had unexpected, serious medical issues that Medicaid wouldn't fully cover. And Kristen, since her husband left, was drowning under the weight of her children's expenses and a part-time job. He claimed he'd tried to find a way to tell me, but that I was already so stressed about our debt that he couldn't burden me with theirs. "I was protecting you, Mary. I was handling it." But the word protecting grated on my nerves. "Protecting me?" I whispered, the sound raw and shaky. "You were patronizing me. You decided unilaterally that your sister's financial stability was more important than the mortgage on our house. You chose to be their savior while making me, your wife, struggle to keep the lights on. That wasn't protection, Wilson. That was an act of profound disrespect and financial abandonment." The truth revealed the true cost of his supposed heroism. While he was funneling thousands to Kristen, our family had accrued nearly $40,000 in high-interest debt that was eating us alive. We had missed out on the chance to refinance our mortgage because our credit score had dipped dangerously low. He watched me liquidate my small inheritance, the only security I had left from my grandmother, to cover the mounting utility bills that were threatening disconnection. I had looked at the children and cried, wondering how we would keep going, and all the while, the solution, the money we desperately needed, was in Kristen's landlord's bank account. This wasn't just a betrayal of a marital vow. It was a betrayal of our future. We were supposed to be partners, running one stable home, not 2 separate secret economies, where I was unknowingly funding the second one with my tears and my credit rating. The silence was the worst consequence. We were sharing a home, but we were miles apart, separated by a chasm of deception. The simplest domestic acts, him making coffee, me folding laundry, were now fraught with tension. How could I trust him now? Every kind word, Every financial decision we had ever made, I now questioned. Was the honeymoon to Italy really affordable, or was he secretly borrowing from a loan shark to pay for it? Did he really love me? Or was I just a cover, a convenient, hard-working partner to manage the home while he carried out his secret life? The realization that I had shared my bed with a stranger who viewed me as a liability to be managed rather than a partner to be trusted was a far deeper pain than any financial loss. The shame of being fooled, of being the last to know, burned in my gut like acid. My initial devastation slowly began to congeal into a cold, focused resolve. The raw, bleeding wound of betrayal started to scab over, replaced by a hardening fury. I knew then that forgiveness wasn't an option. Not yet, maybe not ever. What I needed was not reconciliation, but control. I felt a dangerous, exhilarating stirring of something dark, a need for revenge. Not petty, emotional revenge, but a structural, financial rebalancing of power. I realized that my own fear of confrontation had allowed this to happen. I had trusted too blindly. I got up from Michelle's lounge, walked to my desk, and started opening new documents. A spreadsheet for all our current assets, a folder for legal separation documents, and an application for a personal loan, solely in my name. I would not allow myself to be blindsided again. Wilson tried every tactic in the book to reclaim the warmth and trust he had incinerated. He cried, great, ragged sobs that shook his shoulders. He begged, clinging to my knees, and promising to immediately transfer the remaining funds back from his personal slush account and cut off all future funding to Kristen. He bombarded me with promises of couples counseling, of total financial transparency, of a renewed devotion. But his words were utterly hollow, ringing with the desperation of someone trying to avoid consequences, not someone truly repentant for the crushing pain he had caused. I simply stared at him, my face a mask of stone, devoid of feeling. The Mary who would have collapsed into his arms and forgiven him was dead, replaced by a cold, calculating stranger. I moved permanently into the spare room, locking the door every night, a deliberate, symbolic lock against his lies. The children, those poor, sensitive twins, immediately sensed the glacial atmosphere. They became quiet and watchful, their childhood innocence shadowed by the palpable, unnerving tension that permeated our home. We maintained the fragile facade for them, separate meals, separate cars to soccer practice, but the truth was a live wire humming just beneath the surface of our life, threatening to spark and burn everything down at any moment. He was no longer my husband. He was the perpetrator of a crime against my family's security. My entire being had been distilled into a single cold purpose: survival. My focus shifted entirely to the future, to ensuring I could stand, financially whole, without the burden of his deception. I called a lawyer, not to file papers immediately, but to understand my rights, to know the map of the battlefield before the war formally began. The lawyer advised me to secure my finances, to open a new secret bank account, and to start transferring my freelance paycheck there. Every move I made was calculated, precise, and completely devoid of emotion. I didn't tell Wilson where I was working online, or how much I was managing to save from those long late-night hours. I was building my escape raft, quietly, methodically, transaction by transaction, while the crippled ship of our marriage still sailed, listing dangerously on the surface. The thrill of having my own secret, a necessary act of self-preservation, felt like a perverse, justified mirror of his own deception. But my secret was born of necessity, his of deceit. I felt a renewed sense of strength, a cold, hard independence I hadn't realized I needed, forging steel from the ashes of his betrayal. The power of the knowledge that he was utterly unaware of my quiet, seismic preparations was intoxicating. Wilson continued to sleep in the master bedroom alone. He left notes on the counter, desperate pleas for a conversation, for a chance to explain himself, but I ignored them. I knew the explanation. The explanation was that for 2 years, he had been running a solo life, and I had been a prop, a naive manager of his debt while he played the hero. I was no longer interested in excuses. I was interested in consequences. The betrayal of love I could maybe mourn and recover from, but the betrayal of financial partnership, the willful endangerment of my children's home, was a wound that went too deep. I looked at the spreadsheet detailing my new, separate savings, the seed money for my new life. It was small, but it was mine. I closed my eyes, and instead of the anxiety knot, I felt the sharp, clean edge of my own power. A love was gone, replaced by a cold, compelling suspense. What happens next? The final, satisfying act of revenge came a week later. I used my separate funds to pay off the children's entire outstanding private school tuition balance for the year. But before I did, I opened his laptop, which he had foolishly left unlocked, and accessed his email. I forwarded the official tuition paid in full confirmation email to his sister Kristen, with a single, anonymous subject line: "Every family deserves security." I then changed the password on all shared accounts, withdrew half the remaining funds from the joint account, and filed the restraining order on the mortgage, ensuring the bank flagged any attempt he made to sell or borrow against the house. He woke up the next morning to an empty bedroom, a canceled credit card, and the stark, immediate realization that his sister knew the twins were taken care of, and he was entirely alone. The future was terrifyingly uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine to control. This silent war for my financial life had just begun. Click on the next story waiting for you on screen, because trust me, the betrayals only get darker from here.